Hello everyone. Thank you for being here today. Uh, Today we have the IPP in conversation, mission-oriented policy and state building for the global majority, which is part of a series reflection kind of events that Damon and I are organizing. So I will start my opening remarks. Uh, Hello. So I would like to say thank you to Nai and Damon for inviting me to be here, but also for organizing this series. So I just want to talk a little bit about this too before we move forward. So Nai, say hi. She's our PhD student here, heading to her final moments of her PhD journey. I don't know if I should say that, so she'll panic a bit. So, NICE research explore global governance's influence on the public sector digital transformation process, orienting of our emerging digital state and its institutional and societal implications. Specifically, her research explores these themes through a global digital identity initiatives in Kenya and Uganda. The research policy aim is to develop guidance on how public sector digital transformation can be better orientated towards maximizing public value. Then you have Damon here, who is our honorary visiting professor at IPP in labor market and innovation. So it's really hard to try to be concise about Damon journey, academic and political journey. So what I decided to do to give just a taste to how prolific and active he is, I will just mention his education. So Damon received his JD with honors from Harvard Law School. He received his MBA with high honors from Harvard Business School, and is a Baker Scholar. Is that right? A Baker Scholar. So Damon is also a graduate of Harvard College, summa cum laude. I had to Google that, but and has studied history at King's College, Cambridge University here in the UK. So this is just a little taste of how Damon started his long career. So Nye and Damon, they are committed to social betterment as everybody here at IPP. So they came up with the idea for this event, and what they want to ask all of us, to be honest, is what means to bring the histories, perspectives, and voices of the global majority to the forefront across social sciences, particularly in a context of increased geopolitical fragmentation, complexity, and interdependence, and identify the key challenges in implementing the concept of entrepreneurial state across the geographically and politically diverse global south. So thank you very much again. So to start the discussion, what Anai and Damon did, they put together this wonderful panel. So we have here João Pedro, say hi. Nai again, then Jenny and Marian. So what I'm gonna do very quickly is to introduce them. So when it's your turn to speak, I don't need to do that. So João is our PhD student here. Different than I, he's in his first year of his, the first year is the year for PhD journey. We really like it. So he's, well, maybe not him now. His research investigate the understudied financial drivers of deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon rainforest. João wants to propose a theoretical framework on a whole. I'm laughing because I'm his supervisor and we've been discussing how ambitious that is, but I think he should do it. So João wants to propose a theoretical framework on the whole of Brazilian public banks in redirecting finance towards a just Amazonian transition. JAT. Yeah, so I could go on and on, but I think one thing that makes very interesting to have João here is that he's going through the structuralism and the dependency theory approaches to kind of see in that literature what's missing when it comes to climate change and green transition. So looking forward for in 4 years, you can come back and see where João is. Then we have Jenny, who is also a dear friend. She's a research fellow in mission-oriented innovation policy at IPP. She's currently investigating industrial policies and the role of the state in public services and agencies. Her research forms part of the research agenda for the Mission-Oriented Innovation Network in the US, what we call MOIN. She's also co-principal investigator of the Open Society Foundation funded research on narratives in public spending in low and middle income countries, focusing on understanding global, regional, and national narratives around public services, budgets, and provision. So another very interesting research. And Jenny, that just commented, we know each other for a long time ago, and we actually, regarding this discussion of Global South, we initiate that initiative called Diversifying and Decolonizing Diversifying Economics. So she's one of the co-founder of this initiative. So lastly, we have Mariana Mazzucato, that pronounced right. So she's our postdoctoral research assistant on economics of water, which is a fantastic research with Mariana, right? So Mariana is an interdisciplinary research whose work focuses on improving access to water and sanitation in low and middle income countries. She has extensive qualitative experience in the political economy of basic services, including water and sanitation. In 2022, Mariana worked for the Yorkshire Integrated Catchment Solution Programs. Wow. To support 5 city councils in the West Yorkshire in setting a roadmap promoting stakeholders' engagement for the 5 city councils in West Yorkshire, charities, consulting firms, and national government institutions. Okay, so this is all. This, I promise I will finish it soon. So this is our panel. As you can see, it's a very rich panel. It also reflects what we do at IPP as PhD students and scholar. So, I think I'm taking too long time to then pass to these amazing people to start a discussion. I wanted to mention one little thing that is related to what we do at IPP, but also what we're doing in this panel. So we know that conventional economics has failed in the sense of how they understand institutions, especially in the Global South. It's very, very often is the Western perspective that dominated how institutions, and of course the state should be thought. So if you think about the economics, the traditional economics, the way they think the economic system have been largely orientated towards cost minimization and efficiency. So the focus on market efficiency has led to these just-in-time procedures and it justified decades of underinvestment in planning and capacity, right? So you have the other side that kind of challenged this a little bit, which very often you call heterodox economics. But what this panel is doing is actually going beyond this dichotomy of state and not state, right? We are thinking that the role of the state in the economy is much broader than in just ratifying market failure, and it should have a broad understanding of economies as no market economies as well. So this is a little bit of the background, which takes us back as well on what Damon is doing, which is a research on neoliberalism and expert on neoliberalism, because all this kind of very specific point of view to understand the economy gets exacerbated by neoliberal thinking, neoliberal policies, right? And what Damon has been, the statement or the argument that Damon has been putting forward for a very long time now is that we should understand neoliberalism as a global system of a political economy rather than a set of politics within advanced economies. And the paradox of neoliberalism, that an ideology of freedom produces actually a reality of power. So yeah, thank you for that. So I have one slide just to say, I want to read that quote, and I promise it's not just to make a propaganda of the book I'm writing with friends, but it's also that what I've been working at IPP, but also for colleagues, and it has to do with giving Global South scholar voices, can be summarizing this. Here we go. I'm just find in this. Quote, and I'm trying to find here, so I don't need to keep reading there, but here we go. So I'm going to read together, because it's often when someone has a PowerPoint and then doesn't read together. So a vantage point that does not take the West and its political economic, social, and cultural process as the standard against which all the rest of the world is measured, i.e., that does not fall into the white gaze where black, brown, and other non-white people are measured against the standard of northerners' whiteness, can open our eyes for a deeper understanding of institutions, capitalism, and the limits of capitalism transitions, labor, human behavior, and social relationships. So this is very much a grasp what the background of this panel is, and that's it from me. So our first speaker is Damon. He has 10 minutes, and then we go to the panel.
Thank you, Carolina, and good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to see this room so packed. It's a real tribute to the fine scholars that have come together here today. I have to begin by saying that while Carolina was kind enough to associate me with the inception of this is really, in many respects, my friend and colleague Nye's project. And I'm so honored to have been asked yes, that's good. I've been so honored to be asked to share the stage with these really impressive young scholars who are working very hard to broaden our understanding of political economy and particularly of the challenges involved in implementing the vision of the entrepreneurial state that our dear friend Mariana, who's sitting in the back there, formulated. I think it's really important to begin by recognizing that this is in some ways an exploration in a global context of Mariana's groundbreaking ideas. Specifically, this event in many respects came out of mine and Nye's work on a brief series of lectures that I did last spring on neoliberalism as a global system. And out of that really came a couple of insights that I want to share with you that I think are central to this project. And to begin with, the point that Carolina made, that when we talk about the entrepreneurial state and the challenge of the reality that private capital is not, as Mariana says, not a lion but a pussycat, and the need to have the state play a role substantively in moving resources, financial capital and other resources, into the process of innovation and to co-create markets, that this set of insights exists. This set of insights exists and has life inside a context and against the backdrop of neoliberalism as a global system that has dominated the political economy of the world over the last 40 years, right? But that today is in crisis. And that, as Carolina said, that system is not the same in every place, right? The world, and it's fundamentally misleading to look at the historic imperial centers, Europe and North America, Japan, as defining what neoliberalism is. That it's critical to look at the experience of the global majority in the neoliberal era as important, right, as the experience of people living in places like we're in now. If you don't do that, then you miss how the world's political economy actually works, as opposed to pretty stories people tell about how it works, right? Now, specifically, there are 2 points that really come to this question of thinking in depth about how to build effective entrepreneurial states in the nations of the global majority. And the first point I want to make about this, and this is kind of a point that has a sort of physics analogy, right? The great insight of relativity theory in physics is that there's no preferred reference point. Right? There's no preferred reference point in relation to motion, and there's no preferred reference point in relation to gravity, to acceleration. We need to bring that type of thinking to contemporary political economy, right? And to understand that there isn't a preferred reference point. We shouldn't be looking at the world from London or from New York, right? We should be looking at the world with the assumption that what happens in other places, right? What happens in Nairobi and in Shanghai and in Delhi and in Sao Paulo is as consequential, if we properly understand it, as what happens in the former imperial centers. And in my neoliberalism lectures, 2 of them really about the United Kingdom, and what I learned through research into the modern industrial history of the UK, is that in fact decisions and actions made in the nations of the former British Empire were as important for the destiny of Britain domestically as decisions in Britain were for those countries. And we need to bring that insight more generally to the question of understanding what is required to have effective entrepreneurial states in the context of crises like climate change. That bringing the framework of what that type of question or that kind of analysis means in the former imperial centers is not the same as what it means in the countries of the global majority. And what it means in the countries of the global majority is as important, or perhaps more important, than what it means in the countries of the former imperial centers. Secondly, and these 2 points are deeply connected. Not all states are the same in their origins and their nature, and in whom they serve. Right? It matters how different states came into being, and what political and economic interests both brought them into being and sustained them. Right? So, for example, in the context of this discussion, states that have their origin in colonial structures have, in a sense, profoundly different DNA than states that have their origin as colonizers. And if you want to ask the question, how do you make a state into an effective entrepreneurial state? You might want to first ask, what kind of state are we starting with? Similarly, states that have essentially become the instruments of various sorts of interests that are not very well aligned with the people that state governs present unique challenges. States that, for example, have become essentially the instrument of extractive industries, right, represent a particularly profound challenge, right? If, for example, the key thing we need them to do is to innovate in ways that might undermine those industries, right? That's a very real thing in many countries, and is an important starting point for these analyses. So I'm going to stop right there. Those 3 points are the ones that I hope to sort of bring to this discussion and help frame what you're now going to hear in detail about the incredible learning that our panel has brought to these questions. And so with that, I'm not sure who's going first. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Damon. So we're going to go for our panel 45 minutes, right? So we have around 10 to 12 minutes each. So we're going to follow that order. So as Na is extremely organized, she's sharing in advance a few words, a few questions or points. I hope you don't mind if I read them out loud to the audience to kind of stimulate this panel. So the first one is, in the geographies that you're studying, considering its historical and contemporary realities, what does the state see as its primary purpose? And what are the legacies and conditions shaping that purpose? The next question is, what are key global factors impacting countries' ability to pursue mission-oriented policy and cultivate more entrepreneurial state, as informed by your research area of focus and more broadly the global majority? So yeah, that's what's setting the background of that panel. Okay, Jenny, please.
Yeah. So hi everyone. I think it's an honor for me to be here and share some of the insights from my work at IIPP. Maybe before, I just want a heads up. I don't know whether I can have a satisfactory answers to the 2 very difficult questions there, but I can share. Number one is from a very important part of the work that I've been doing is to shift. Before we actually can have entrepreneurial state or mission-oriented innovation policies, we need to shift the narratives. shift the narratives from the outside, shift the narratives from the inside as well. And I will follow with an example, one of the case study that we're writing up for the casebook published by IPP soon this year in Bangladesh. So I want to start with the first point about the shifting narratives. So one of the things that we realize is COVID-19 obviously has tremendous, terrible consequences for us all, but it also illuminates us in rethinking about the role of a state. And the state had to step in and really take all of the risk that's possible to quickly develop COVID vaccine. That is one of the key examples we have to think. If we leave it to the short-termism, profit-driven nature of the private sector, of the market, I don't think we can actually be still here today, sitting together. Even though we know that pharmaceutical industry has been, has long been credited for, for example, the vaccines that you were receiving with all the brand names and stuff like that. But if we actually look at the histories of pharmaceutical investment in vaccine development, like at least 5-10 years right before the COVID pandemic, we know that they were tired. They had been tired. They were just like, okay, we're going to divest from this. It didn't bring us any other profit. So the government had to step in. The government had a long history of investing in the mRNA technology, and then they actually have to step in and say to convene the universities, the research, and all the academies and the private sector and say, let's do this. And we will protect you, we will bear all the risk, and we'll give you the rewards. So that is one of the things that I think that is the moment we have to catalyze on this momentum to rethink the role of the state. But one of the important things is the state is not just about, I think that when we think about the state, it's not just about whether many people actually kind of doubt that public organizations, the state, doesn't have the same capacity. They cannot be as efficient as the private organizations, the private companies. But I think that we have to also rethink not just the role, but also they are completely two different types of organizations. Public organizations are fundamentally different from private organizations. And I can share my 4 points. Number one is public sector organizations are uniquely placed to deliver public missions. So when we think about public missions, we think about the missions that are defined, implemented collectively by a range of stakeholders, by the state, the private sector, and the general public as well. So these public missions cannot be done, right? It cannot be even comprehended by the private organizations. And the state can have a sector-specific capabilities to strategize. And we can see the examples of like the US Inflation Reduction Acts of 2022, for example, when they set their public missions include a net zero economy by 2050. So things like that, we can say it cannot be done by the private organizations. The second point of differentiations is public sector organizations have distinctive capabilities to initiate, convene, coordinate, and collaborate across sectors for public mission delivery. And I think we, with the examples that I've just mentioned about the COVID vaccine development, we can see that this ability exists. And I don't think if you actually ask a company like a pharmaceutical company and say, can you do that? Can you convene everyone that are just like all their sectors? I don't think that would be one of the work that they would do. The third point is that the public sector organizations operating state activities can change the behavior of private sector. And they can inject public resources, not just finance, but also other resources into the hands of the private and third sector. And one of the things that we do at IPP in recent years, Mariana's and Professor Danny Roderick from Harvard Kennedy have recently published papers on conditionalities. That is one of the things that only the state can do. And if they really need to rethink how the state will contract private sector with certain very specific conditions, with risk and reward sharing mechanisms, they can actually direct or redirect the development, the development trajectory of the markets. And the fourth difference. The fourth differences between the two organizations is very clearly, while the private companies, the private organizations are driven by the short-term profitability, the public sectors are driven by the long-term missions. This is where we can see, for example, with private organizations, they are under constant pressure to really deliver, let's say, profit by the end of the year, dividends and stuff like that. With the public organizations, we can be patient. We can be patient with the resources. The public can be patient with all the missions. So let's say, for example, the government can look forward to like 2050. Right, to 2030, to 2050, can you actually think of a private organization who say, well, we don't know whether we're gonna exist in the next 5 years, even, right? Depending on the volatility of the market. So I think that is one of the things before we can say, okay, can we actually implement mission-oriented innovation policies in any countries? We need to actually, number one, is to change the way we think about the state's capabilities and the state's role. And one of the examples that we just written, and hopefully we can publish what we call the Mission-Oriented Innovation Network Casebook 2024 in the next few months by IPP. Is that we're going to include a case study on a Bangladesh, the Bangladesh Innovation Agency is called Aspire to Innovate, A2I. And this is one of the agencies I think was really much inspired by Mariana's work. So I can share with you about A2I is that Bangladesh has a serious problem with the efficiency in the delivering public services. So there's a number that we were given by A2I is that in 2007, only 10% of Bangladesh's civil servants had computers on their desk, which actually was astonishing when you think about, we are using technically very powerful computers in our hands nowadays. So the government, the Bangladeshi government, and the Prime Minister's office established Aspire to Innovate, A2I, with a mandate to ensure inclusive, citizen-centric digital transformation of the public sector and bring digital services to citizens. And they focus on health, education, and financial inclusions. They set the missions. For example, in health, 100% birth registration by 2024, universal health coverage by 2030. So those are kind of some of the examples of 5 missions that they set out. And how can I say that this is much inspired by Mariana's work was that A2I, the general managers of A2I said to us, this is a non-mission oriented approach to creating missions. And they already thought about missions, but they didn't have the language. They have long thought about missions, but they didn't have the language of missions. And they came across IPP's work, Mariana's work, and they say, well, it's quite difficult, actually, to say, if you have this pot of money, which one, which mission you need to set, how do you need to prioritize that? So what they did was, initially they identified a quick win, and they convened the secretaries of the state to present and socialize their ideas. They identify commonalities, and then the mission areas emerge. So it's a little bit like a variation of how you set missions, right? In this country, because there are so many areas in Bangladesh that you need to really put your money in. So this kind of process of collaboratively identifying the areas for missions based on the immediate needs of the government departments actually is a mission-oriented innovation, right? So it's an act of mission-oriented innovation. I mean, Mariam asked me earlier about how's the outcome, right? What's the outcome of this A2I? So, I mean, they say to us, they gave the numbers, so far they issue over 100 million digital IDs to more than 125 million residents, and they launch over 1,500 government e-services. So questions like, is that mission achieved? I mean, all the four missions, is that achieved? Is this en route? We can say that. The agency is still there. They're still doing their work. But the mission that's set out is still considered very much ambitious, right? It's difficult to say if you can achieve the missions. But because if you set the missions as measurable, as tangible, but also as ambitious enough, you will bump into the situations when when can you actually achieve the missions by a certain date? And I think that's a big issue in developing countries, not just developing countries, but in developing countries, when you have a limited state capacity. So alongside with rethinking, reshifting the narratives, bold enough, the boldness to take on missions, to rethink, reshape missions, you also need to, at the same time, build the state capacity to do all of those things, right? I mean, obviously, I have shared one examples out of many other examples, but I can think of one of the things that maybe, sorry, I'm just like self-promoting out there. When Karen is talking about her new book, but I'm co-authoring a book on developing semiconductor manufacturing in the global south, and we're looking at countries like Vietnam, countries like in Southeast Asia, and how the state is gonna kind of set the mission. Is that going to be a moonshot mission, or is that something that is kind of more feasible for these countries? I think we have some more years to watch out for that. But let's hope that we start with the first thing is this nation, these governments, they really need to diversify their thinkings, to kind of move away from the neoclassical and neoliberalisms, right? And that is, I think, is the first and foremost for the global south. Thank you.
Fantastic, Jenny. Fascinating. And right on time. Thank you. Nai?
So hi everyone, it's great to see you tonight. I'll talk to you a little bit about my work in relationship to the themes and kind of what even inspired this whole thing. So in my work, some of the things I'm really interested in is thinking about, thinking about how the role of global governance with relationship to digital transformation. And part of how I explore that is I look at that through global political economy, and then also through different types of decolonial perspectives, specifically to try and understand how does coloniality operate or influence or animate the power dynamics that in turn influence how digital transformation is happening in different places. And my empirical case studies are in Kenya and Uganda, where I'm looking at what are the different types of partnering arrangements that are happening between governments and international organizations like the UN, the World Bank, IMF, and a variety of other actors. And different types of philanthropic actors who are actually influencing a lot of civil sector actors as well. And I think that in terms of looking at that and understanding of that, part of what I'm interested in, I'm just looking at notes, and so, yeah. But I became interested in thinking about to what extent, how does colonial violence and exploitation give rise to the economic, political, and social hierarchies and relations animating extreme asymmetries of power and uneven development and racialized and gendered global divisions of labor? And to what extent does this influence different types of policy coercion and structural violence that result today? And so I think that in terms of thinking about that with respect to digital transformation, I became really interested in trying to understand what are the different types of constraints, terms, and conditions that are becoming embedded in the formal and informal arrangements between different types of international organizations, private actors, philanthropic actors, and state governments. And what does that mean in terms of how digital transformation unfolds? And in terms of that work, it's really interesting because I think that one of the things that I argue about in my work is to what extent is there a convergence between surveillance state capitalism and then also data colonialism. And the surveillance state may be more internal to the different countries that I look at, and then data colonialism as this kind of different type of global process that's also happening within countries. And I think that where these things converge, I think is where we see a lot of things happening, but where they diverge, to what extent can we look at trying to reform global governance to empower different countries around the global south to pursue digital transformation in ways that do not have to undermine their digital sovereignty or ability to digitally industrialize in the future, or also doesn't constrain their ability to try and create different types of labor protections for workers in the global digital economy and things like that. And so I think that in terms of the state, I'm interested in understanding how does coloniality continue to animate power through international organizations, through these global governance arrangements? What are some of the ways that is being diminished? And so I think that there's two things that I at least see happening in my work. I think it's really interesting to talk with people in different state different parts of state government and policy actors to kind of learn, one, to what extent are they able to try and navigate these types of constraints effectively, and also what are the role of different types of movements, particularly, I think, not only national movements happening within countries, but transnational movements that are emerging around digital rights. And why I think this is important to reflect on with relationship to this area is because I think that some of the countries I look at, they're not the largest countries. And some of the mechanisms that they might employ in global policy and might be able to leverage, it's really hard for them maybe to do that individually. However, through different types of, through different types of engagement and transnational, I think, collaboration or cooperation, it can change. And specifically, I look at history as being instructive in this. And so, for example, one of the things that was really interesting that I also look at in my work is looking at how different types of decolonial movements were used and organized around the globe, how different countries work together. And specifically, I think there are two different prongs where that comes up. And so, for example, around looking at how countries work together in the global south around political decolonization efforts that would take place in the 50s, 60s around the world, and how they were able to literally reorient and reorient how global governance regime was working to try and achieve those aims collectively together, and how that was very effective. However, there was also another prong of that same movement, this kind of global decolonization called more of this kind of economic prong. And so looking at economic decolonization as how countries could also regain agency and control, and looking at neocolonialism. And to a certain extent, at least from what we might already know and see going on today and what I've seen in my work, it's this second prong which remains unfinished. And I think it's this second prong which I see showing up around this convergence that is emerging around this surveillance state capitalism and data colonialism in ways that are harmful and that undermine public value. And so I think part of why I'm really interested in thinking about where there are opportunities to work effectively together to try and change those dynamics within global governance, again, this time around digital transformation, since it's playing a huge role, is to think about how can we work effectively together to do that. And so some of the work, items that were really inspiring for me was looking at efforts of, I think, South Africa and India when they were, I think, it was before the WTO, and they were trying to resist kind of a permanent moratorium on e-commerce, for example, so that they could try and retain some agency in their own digital industrialization and protect their domestic markets as they try to grow them. I think this is an example of how blocks can come together to work effectively to do that, and I'm really interested in to what extent that can happen more so, which is kind of what I look at. And then I think in terms of also another thing that I think is really interesting is the histories. And so looking at the histories of the state and of public administration. And in the geographies that I look at Kenya and Uganda, which were formerly under the colonial control of the British Empire. It influenced how these public institutions and the state was formed. And initially, the colonial state was not necessarily looking at the people within these territories as subjects, but rather as objects, and treated them as such. And so I think that in terms of looking at how did these institutions evolve even past, this post-colonial moment and into the present, but still to what extent is maybe some of that, those legacies still influencing these institutions currently. And I think it's important to start there, because when we look at the relationship between the state and the public, I think that it's one that has been complicated for the geographies that I look at, and I think that is one that we need to pay more attention to in terms of understanding that what is happening there in these conditions is informative for what can happen in other parts of the world as well. And so I think this is some of what I look at in my work. I don't know how I'm doing on time. Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, so, okay, I'll keep going. And so I think that the coloniality that continues to shape power dynamics enable the bi-directional asymmetric flows of global capital, information, and data, and that is occurring today. We can use global governance and different mechanisms of global policy to begin to change that. And I think in terms of thinking about the entrepreneurial state and understanding what are the different ways that might be constrained in certain geographies and how they circumvent that, I think that's a story worth sharing for all parts of the world. And I think that also in terms of part of the way that I see that that's happening, really interesting, is talking with people in countries that like Kenya and Uganda and other parts of the global south, and looking at some of the different types of movement efforts that are emerging and some of the transnational solidarities that are emerging. And so I'll just say a quick shout out quickly that I'm really interested in also the movement side as another type of leverage outside of these institutions. And so I'm a part of a network called Terra Commune, which looks at trying to undo data colonialism in the global south, primarily focusing on Latin America, but all the parts of the world as well. The Digital Good Network as well, and then also I think Decon. I recently joined Decon, so I love it. But really thinking about this as not just a problem that's happening within these countries, but a problem that is instructive for many countries, and countries needing to work together to protect that and to change that. And so I think this is some of the remarks that I want to share. Very happy to answer questions. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nai. Fascinating. So now we are moving to João.
Let's just keep track of time, because otherwise it gets really hard. I'm really honored to be here today, and I feel very glad to see so many familiar faces, and also to be able to be in this panel with 5 academics that I really do admire. So thank you for the invitation. And I have 3 main points to speak today, and I'll try and take a risk here because I'll do something that you don't really expect from an economist. So I'll tell a story. And if you follow me, then maybe sometimes give me a nod or something so that I understand I'm making myself clear. Basically, what I'll try and say is the story of a country that originated from a tree. And that's the country of Brazil. Brazil is a country that has a really interesting story dating back to colonialism. And I really appreciate the idea that Damon has brought on understanding what kind of origins does the state have when we are interacting with specific entrepreneurial states. And Brazil was, let's see, as I was taught in school, discovered by the Portuguese in the 1500s. And the first commerce and the first commodity that was explored was a tree that had a red pigment called Brazilin. And that Brazilin, which is kind of referring to the red pigment of fire, was turned into a commerce, was turned into a business that would then go exploited by the people who would be able to extract it, the Brasileiros, the Brazilians. and then would go into the European markets because the red color was extremely appreciated by monarchies. So in a sense, it's something that was there since the beginning, and that red today also represents a really big part of the challenges that the country is still facing in one of the last economic frontiers, the Amazon rainforest. So it also kind of epitomizes the cases of indigenous people who are suffering invasions, but they are also knowing how to preserve their own materials and their own biodiversity, but also the challenge of a country that seems not to have found itself. And I guess that in this reason, when I ask about what's the entrepreneurial state in Brazil today, it is exactly in the moment in which Damon has mentioned that it is rethinking the way it understands itself. So the state has been one of the main actors in destroying the Amazon since the 1970s. This is because the Amazon was seen as the main kind of way to alleviate urban pressure in the southeast and the southern part of the country, so that as we never had a proper agrarian reform in the country, the demands for people who were landless, they were just being sent and given land into the Amazon to be settlers, including the name of the Institute for National Colonization and Agrarian Reform. That word is still there, so I'm really happy that you have mentioned the idea of colonization as shaping our relationships with development today, because that's in the main institute that runs agrarian reform in Brazil. It's also a colonial institute. And going back to the idea of a business and that tree that was at the heart of the country at its inception, it also symbolizes the idea of a tree that went extinct. So at some moment into the 1970s and 80s in Brazil, the Brazil wood, so the Brazilian tree that originated its extinction, went into extinction, basically. So you could only find it in zoos. And reforestation was the only way to actually protect this tree. Today you still find it in, for instance, the botanical gardens, close to the palaces of the national government. But today the challenge in the Amazon is really trying to find that moment in which we are actually realizing how important the trees, the biodiversity, are for our country. And in a sense, if we understand that what exactly is causing deforestation today, then billions of dollars into the Amazon fund will not solve the problem, because the Amazon today is a problem of economic exploitation. It is a business in the sense of the deforestation in there. So the financial networks, and by that I mean the investors, the bankers, most of them are developmental actors in Brazil. So for instance, the Banco do Brasil, the Brazilian bank, the Brazilian Development Bank, they have really good cases and projects trying to mitigate deforestation, but they are also the ones who are providing finance for that deforestation to take place in the first case. So in a sense, we cannot blame the international capital and the international settlers, because in this sense, we have exploited our own selves. And we have become really good in doing this. But at this moment, it feels like it is a turning point. So Brazil has become an environmental leader, and it has set missions, actually, to influence its industrial policy and the way it interacts with its own self. It has, for instance, established a mission to end deforestation until 2030. And that is extremely ambitious. But the problem is that that mission in itself will not materialize if it does not align with those actors. So for instance, if we see those missions right there, deforestation-free Amazon by 2030, it needs development banks. It needs the idea that the people on the ground, they will be able to reap the benefits of, for instance, a deforestation-free Brazil nut or deforestation-free Brazil meat. And today, that's not necessarily happening. This is because we are still engaging with deforestation from a perspective of how to fund reforestation instead of how to stop it. It is still very much today, and that goes back to the colonization issue, a problem of property rights. And by that, I don't mean the issue that no one knows who is exactly owning that land, because there's no open land in Brazil. So the land which is not assigned belongs to the state. But it's really difficult to fiscalize this. So there are policies on how to potentially regulate. So for instance, command and control policies, they have been really useful in decreasing deforestation from the 2008 until 2011, more or less. But today we are having a challenge because those policies, they are not responding anymore. So the problem really becomes a very political issue, which has an economic root. And I think that this institute, that's maybe why I decided to come here to do my PhD, has a really interesting way in uniting economic and political wicked problems that have multiple cases. And deforestation is one of them. Because for Brazil, for instance, it is what agriculture and agribusinesses are a big component of the GDP. So those macroeconomic flows that are behind it, they are also behind the growth of the country. And if we are to finish with deforestation, how do we compensate? So we are talking in a case that growth may be not needed. I don't want to take the argument that way. I just want to question whether the quality of growth should be also discussed. I'm doing all right with time? And so for that reason, I just wanted to propose, and that's why I think the debate that I had with Carolina is, how does our own economic theories, such as dependency theories, the structuralists, such as Celso Furtado, for instance, how would they conceive the problem today? Yes, they did not see the rise of finance, they did not saw the importance that those flows play today in our economy, but they have really important insights in terms of providing an understanding of what that just transition in the Amazon means. And I aim to establish that idea into, not necessarily establish, but there's a lot of good work going on. That's the big question for the country, in what this just Amazonian transition, JAT, would look like. So before I wrap up, I just maybe wanted to answer some of the questions, and how can the entrepreneurial state be actually taking place in the Amazon, and how can states be more entrepreneurial? And maybe they shouldn't. In the case of Brazil, if it's for the state that has already deforested the Amazon, maybe it shouldn't. But if it's a state that is able to transform those value chains into something that the indigenous people, the riverside communities, can actually reap the benefits of the value chains, then maybe yes. But by transforming the land into an asset, by providing and creating carbon markets that are not necessarily regulated, that might not do it. So I think in the case of the Amazon, the missions agenda really does seem more appropriate. And Brazil has already developed 6 missions for industrial strategy, and 3 of them touch on the Amazon. So deforestation-free, agri-value chains, also bioeconomy transition, the structural transformation plan that the Ministry of Finance is currently trying to implement. It's really bold. But the argument that I'm trying to pose it here is that it's not going to work without changing the basics of the infrastructure on how we think of the state. And before I wrap up, because I feel like I have 43 seconds, is the idea that, going back to that country that originated as a tree, if that tree at some point went into extinction, we can't afford to lose an Amazon. We can't afford at this moment, because of its biophysical importance, because of its geographical importance. This is not just a forest which Brazil manages. It manages with 9 other countries in South America. It has to cooperate on how can it develop institutions and public capabilities, as Jenny said, to be able to protect its origin, its biodiversity, but also the people that are already protecting that biodiversity. So in a sense, I would favor the idea of a mission instead of an entrepreneurial state. Thank you.
Fascinating. Thank you very much, João. No pressure about the framework then, right? Okay, so we're going to go for our last speaker, Marion.
Thank you so much, and I hope you have the patience for final 10 minutes of people talking. So I'm Mariana Mazzucato. I work with Mariana on the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, so I will try a little bit to talk about what I've learned through the last year about missions and how we can think about it when we talk about water. And when I say water, I mean some people will understand I'm talking about water resources. Some people will think about water services like toilets and your tap water, and how you deliver it to people. And my focus throughout the years was in the global south or global majority, or whatever you are comfortable to name it. And throughout the most consistent reflection that I've received from countries like Kenya, Bangladesh, India, and Palestine, where I come from, is that we don't have the fund for that, not necessarily because we are poor or something, but because maybe it's not a priority. So you will see that funds allocated toward water investments is usually very marginal for most of these countries. And that's one of the reasons is that we don't know, or we don't care to know enough what is the returns of investments for investing in water. And basically, as I said, it's not a priority. And therefore countries eventually just go and get funds or loans or grants from development banks like World Bank, IMF, etc. And this is where I believe is the issue of why these countries cannot or need to think a lot about how to adapt entrepreneurial state approach or model. And when you have a country that gets its money to fund, for example, a wastewater treatment plant from the World Bank, then you are restricted to what this institute tells you what's right or what's wrong or what's best. And this can be said as transplanting people's thinking or the Western ideas on what's work, not only about technology, but also about the governance model. Do I follow public-private partnerships? Do I follow private sector delivery? And in the last 20 years or so, there was so much pressure in these countries toward private provision or, in best case scenario, commercialization of public utilities. And the fact that lots of people in the room might argue with that or against that, but the idea is if you don't have the set of skills, or not skills, the financial capacities to run these modules, then you eventually are ready to fail. And we can say this with huge confidence because we live in this city, in this lovely city, which started commercialization in 1980s, and then over the time we are now in that point of huge financialization of water. So if London could not fix it, how I'm imagining Gaza to fix it? Not now, of course, but after they are done with that. So the idea is transplanting these approaches and technologies to achieve some sort of mission is one question. The other question is of what missions are, I think is the most interesting about it, is that it's goal-oriented or it's objective-oriented. So it's about setting the right goal. And again, when the Sustainable Development Goals tells me that the first goal should be, for Bangladesh, for example, is ending open defecation. So as a country who likes to look as a complying in its international community, I want to end open defecation. And therefore I pull all my resources and try to do that. And Bangladesh did that. They accomplished zero open defecation. I can't remember the year, but it was early 2000s. But what happened is that after they did achieve the zero open defecation, they could not progress in what they need to do next, which is having environmental friendly wastewater. Sorry, I know this is not your usual topic. When you talk about missions, it's not digital transformation or anything. It's just basic toilets and water. But the idea is that the country could not move forward with its progress to water and sanitation, not necessarily because they don't want to. They want to. Everyone wants to have a clean river or clean surrounding environment, but the vision to have, I think one of the speakers talked about the short-term goal and the long-term goal. A private sector can think about short-term goal, and supposedly the state can think about a longer-term goal. But when the state is just stuck in a space of limited financial capacities, but also it's completely, not completely, but let's say 50% of its incentive, of its ambition to achieve that goal was pushed through so many vehicles, such as SDGs, or Development Bank wants to end everything bad in the world by their policies. So this is one idea. The last point which I want to make, not trying to take a long time, is that water is not a sector. It's not a one thing that you can fix on its own. So when you look at water, you look at climate change, you look at biodiversity, so many issues. Geopolitics, food security. So when you try to fix water on itself, you fail. You are destined to fail because you are just addressing one small element in a very big array of challenges and issues. So India, for example, at some point early 2000, I think, the community sued Coca-Cola because of their abuse of water, quantity and quality-wise. So when you think about fixing water, don't come and ask the state to fix a situation where they don't have the autonomy to do that. Why? Because in the water sector, we have this rigid laws and regulations and treaties between countries and between transnational companies that the state cannot just say, you are abusing something and I will move on. No, they have to go through a huge processes of courts, international courts to do that. So I think, I don't know how long do I have? A lot? Yeah. Okay. Okay, good. So the last point is that, again, we can talk about this for 2 days, but the one element that I think is missing from trying to think about mission-oriented or entrepreneurial state is the autonomy of a country to achieve what it wants. You don't dictate for someone to use this type of technology, this type of water, allow it to have its own vision, building on its own understanding of capacities, of context, and not embedding or transplanting ideas that comes from somewhere which is completely different. And I did not talk about the colonial aspect, but you can, if you want to talk about that, you can talk for ages about the type of technology that are pushed, and even if you look at Nairobi, you can tell where the colonizer used to live, just because they have better sanitation there, and because, of course, the white population used to live there, get all the nice stuff, and the indigenous population were kicked out of it. In Gaza, I don't want to talk about Gaza, but you can tell what type of technology is posed on Gaza before the war. Now we don't have any technology, but before that, development banks would come and say, you want to have wastewater treatment plants, best technology, and we'll pay $100 million to do that. But then there's no electricity to run that. Before the war, forget about this year's war, there's no technology, there's no access to spare parts, there's nothing. So if you, from the start, thought about this, the government there, despite how you perceive it or how you think about it, and think about them as more autonomous, have more agency to think about the best solution that they can implement in order to achieve their whatever goal in water. And yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Mario. Another fascinating talk. And please do talk about Gaza. The war has stopped us from seeing Gaza from the colonial perspective and history. So it's always important to highlight that. So we're supposed to have our final speaker. So this is panel of young scholar, although I'm not sure if you two are a young scholar, but supposed to be squeezed in one side by Damon, another side by Associate Professor Julius Magiwagwa. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, who is an Associate Professor in Innovation and Development at the UCL Department of Science, Technology, Engineering, and Public Policy. And he, among many other things, he's an expert on global health, but he couldn't make it today. And he sent just like a few words, and he asked us to share with all of you. So before we move to questions, I just would like to spend 2 or 3 minutes reading what he sent to us. Okay, so Professor Julius said he would like to reflect on the importance of historical context in unpacking narratives informing missions, with recognition that the historical context itself is a laden one, with respect to voices represented and paradigms informing what we know and what we do not know. Contestation and agency matter a lot in this, and I guess this first paragraph probably summarizes everything. Related, mission, like any socio-technical imaginary, now and in the past, are the results of deliberated choices. And these choices are themselves constrained by different structures and other constructs which deliberately or inadvertently, oh gosh, and it is anyway, place and keep certain groups on the margins. The case of location of mental health facilities in different parts of the world is an interesting one, in that its legal underpinning lie in a piece of legislation called the Lunacy Act. Hence, the design and location of these facilities as prisons-like structures, far away from other treatment facilities. And there are many other examples where history has normalized or modernized oppressive practices. That's a good intervention. That would be a good end if he was here, but it was just me reading. So thank you very much. So we have lots of time for question now because, of course, everybody managed to keep timing, and Julius is not here. So I will open to the audience and also to the online. Fabian, you're the one? Okay, so let's start with the audience, perhaps 2 questions from the audience, and then we move to 2 online, yeah? Thank you. Who would like to go first? Thank you very much. If you could, introduce yourself, that would be great.
Sure, thanks very much. It's very stimulating. Titus Alexander, author of Unraveling Global Apartheid. And my question is, you were referring a lot to colonialism, but of course we live now in unequal representation in global governance, which is a contemporary and continuing process. And I wondered to what extent in your researches you're looking at the impact of the unequal representation in the institutions of global governance, which you all mentioned, and what, if you like, what mission would you like to see to change that? I know it's a big question, but...
Thank you very much. So let's get another 3 questions. So I would ask you to take notes, and then we go through them, yeah? Okay. One more, please. Oh, you have one? Yeah. Okay, great.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. My name is Jakob Mulugeta. I'm based at the Department of Science, Technology, Engineering, and Public Policy, where Julius is located. Well, thank you so much for this wonderful discussion, and many appreciations to the young scholars for really stimulating our evening. I think one question I had was, and of course, I mean, many of us are very much in line with mission-oriented policy, innovation, but also, of course, the entrepreneurial state and other things that you, Carolina, and others are working on in this department. But one thing that I feel perhaps might help us to try and think through some of the complexities here is the simple question of values. Where do we place values? I mean, when we talk about institutions, mission, because I've seen a kind of mission, sort of what looks like a mission-oriented type of initiatives falling apart after a while simply because they haven't been able to humanize what they're doing. And my country, Ethiopia, is a very clear example, which had very robust kind of economic plan with a very strong climate policy, but it didn't really land some of those ideas, further down. It wasn't a negotiated type of a policy or a plan, but rather something that is, very much, top down. So where do we place values? The values of, people-centered values, and how do we then begin to actually construct that into something that could look like a humanized sort of mission-oriented policy? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Someone has to hold Mariana in the back because she can't address that question. So, Fabian, do you want to bring 2 from the online?
So one question is, how can the Republic of South Africa repurpose South African Airways in a mission-oriented approach? So a much more tangible question. And a second question is larger, and it's about, can you understand what an entrepreneurial state looks like without a theory of what makes states? and a correct genealogy of what the US, how the US state developed and what it is.
Thank you very much. So I asked the panel to try to keep it short, but also, of course, reply everything properly. And then we're going to go for another round, so just hang in there. Should we start with you, Damon? Yeah.
I'll be very brief. I think these are wonderful questions, by the way, and thanks to everyone who asked them. And I just have a couple of responses very quickly. I think the question of unequal representation is fundamental. And it exists both in places where there's been a lot of discussion and places where there hasn't been. So the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank are, as our panelists have said, are critical institutions which some states in the developing, who are actually the key constituency for some states in the developing world. And if you look at how they're governed, it doesn't map, it certainly is not democratic in any sense against a global backdrop. But so is the UN Security Council. In fact, far worse. Right? The UN Security Council is a map of the colonial order circa 1945. That's the truth. Right? Whatever one may think of it as an empirical matter, that's what it is. On values, that's an enormously deep question. I think my own view is that at some level, the ambition of the entrepreneurial state has as a subtext an assumption of civic virtue as the value. And civic virtue is a very old idea. And I think that, and again, this is sort of an amateur's point of view, but I think that states, in order for states to be successful entrepreneurial states, they have to be motivated by a kind of esprit de corps. And that has to be cultivated in very serious and intentional ways. I wish I knew enough about the airlines, about South African Airways to be able to answer that question intelligently. I would just say that that type of question is exactly what we are trying to foster. Because South African Airways, I bet, is a fairly old institution and deeply embedded in its roots in the apartheid legacy in South Africa. And yet, I also suspect it's a critical asset of the current South African society. And so engaging with this panel is designed to try to provoke and encourage people to engage in exactly that question. I'm just not qualified to substantively answer it. So I think, did I miss one? There was one. The U.S. That I am qualified to talk about. Yeah, but it's inappropriate to go on about it. I would just say that I would just say that this is, at least in my mind, this question of the origins of states is to me at least largely inspired by my own thinking about the origin of my own state, the U.S. state. In two sentences, there's been a lot of revisionism about the origin of the federal government of the United States. Its origins and purposes are quite complex, right? But I'll tell you something it's not. Right? The United States government was not organized to facilitate the extraction of wealth from the United States by a foreign power. Right? And that is really important in understanding the difference in thinking about, for example, the United States government versus, say, the government of Angola.
I think all the questions are really, really difficult. I don't know how the answers can be satisfactory. But the question about unequal representations, I totally can second, the opinions about unequal representations in the key financial institutions and also like in development institutions. I actually, my PhD, for my PhD, I looked at the roles of World Bank loans for 65 years and in Southeast Asian countries for the energy sector. And one of the things I realized is exactly like try to second Mariam's opinions about idea transplant is really questionable. And in my research for my PhD, what I found out is that throughout 65 years of keep feeding these young nations the World Banks keep feeding these young nations, especially to in the energy sector, to say, hey, let's liberalize your market, let's privatize, let's equitize, let's do everything that the neoliberal, neoclassical and neoliberal policies would want you to do. They actually never, in the team, because I look at all the documents, like about, I think I was a bit nerdy looking at 2,000 documents like by the World Bank. And what I found was that, the World Bank's got their team, right? And the team are all like in Washington. And then they have like the office team in these countries in Southeast Asia. And when I asked them what the functions of this team in this country, the country team, what they're doing, they actually just project manage. They're not the idea, they're not coming up with ideas, they're not coming up with strategies. So basically you got someone from Washington telling these countries, like, this is what you need to do. And throughout the 65 years of efforts of billions of dollars pouring in, these countries are not completely liberalized. I don't know what the money is spent for. And to be honest, and because the countries have their own minds, right? The government say, hey, hold on, we're going to be cautious. Let's give us money, but we're going to be cautious in taking your advice. So I was thinking, idea transplant is not working. We need idea independence in order to have entrepreneurial state. The questions about values, I think Mariana's got a really wonderfully written report about the whole approach of how you actually can design a mission-oriented innovation policies. It's not just top-down, when you actually can come up with the challenge, the grand challenge, the missions, and coordinations between different departments, but actually the projects itself need to be a bottom-up. So it should be what I think it should be a two-way kind of way of working. But how is that done in practicality is difficult, right? How can you actually have the public to be engaged in the process? It's very difficult. One of the case studies that I've just written for the Greater London Authority and the Mayor of London office is about how they came up with the London Recovery Programme. And in this recovery programme between 2020 to 2023, the Greater London Authority came up with 9 key missions, and then they made a call for the projects that will address the mission. So the people from different boroughs, from even underrepresented communities can come up with the missions which they think altogether can address the missions that's set by the authority. So I think that is one way of thinking about how you can actually engage the general public. I absolutely have no idea about South Africa Airways. I work with Mariana's to support in working with the US. One of the things that I realized is that you can, if the government will, they can do it. But as long as the will come from both parties, then you can actually do something great. The Bipartisan Chips Act, for example, is one of the things that the government, the Biden government, managed to get a unanimous agreement across two parties. And I realized that if other countries, even though if you have one party country or you have two parties or multiple parties, as long as they both understand what matters for the people, for the government, then they can do it. And I think one of the sentences that you say earlier, I think was great, was like who they serve, who the government serve, right? Are they serving the public? If they know that they're serving the public, then they can actually come together.
Yeah, okay. So thank you for the excellent questions. I will go through my notes. And so to the first question, in terms of kind of looking at the institutions, I look at that quite a bit in my work. And so I look at what are the different types of partnerships, alliances, networks that are emerging. Also, I tried to look at the different types of world bank instruments to look at, what are the different type of conditions that are being put in there. And then also talking to other types of institutional actors that the state engages with. And so learning about why states might be really interested in adopting certain features in their digital public infrastructure so as to get access to different types of global finance, for example. And so I think that this is extremely important. And the reason why I look at coloniality, and to what Damon was saying earlier, how the power within these institutions, how they are shaped in ways that are very much linked to these histories and that are still sustained today. I try to look at that relationship in terms of understanding how the asymmetric power relations within these institutions are shaping what's happening. And specifically, what kind of inspired my effort to look at this with respect to digital transformation and digital public infrastructure was looking at what was happening in global health. And so initially kind of reflecting on COVID-19, and we have this crisis that's literally affecting the world. And yet and still, in terms of the different types of arrangements that emerged, we still ended up with a vaccine apartheid. And I know Mariana's work looks at this on behalf of her WHO Health for All. She talks more about that. But basically, it was looking at there are limitations even to what global governance can do, even when it was in the interest of the global common good, which she also talks a lot about in her work. And so I think that it's not enough that there's these maybe shared interests and aims. You have to restructure the power that is within these. And I think that what is instructive for how that can happen is specifically what happened with the different types of decolonization efforts and the way that that was pursued at institutions like the UN. So I'm thinking of the Badung Conference or the non-aligned movement, where these countries were coming together to try and change the structural power. And I think that we can come together again to try and change that with respect to digital transformation, since it's affecting all of us. And so I can't wait to check out your book. In terms of history and looking at history, it's instructive. I think that we have seen these methods work before. We can think about, what are the lessons that remain valuable for what we see happening now. In terms of, let's see, the entrepreneurial state and its genealogies and histories, I think it's really critically important. And so to the question that was online, I look at that a lot in my work. So I want to understand how did these different, how did the state and its relationship to the public evolve through different moments, and how does that influence what's happening now, and even how states and its relationships to its populace might be shaped. And so I think it's critically important and extremely valuable. In terms of South Africa, how it can engage in more mission-oriented innovation, I guess, around the airline. I don't know too much about this area, and so I don't know that I have so much to share here. I don't know that I have so much to share with regard to that question, unfortunately. And in terms of the values, where do we place values so we can pursue a more humanized, mission-oriented innovation? And so I think that this question of values, and I like to think about different scales, and so there's maybe public value, how we think about that in relationship to states, but then how do we think about that in relationship to across the globe? And how might these things sometimes align, but they may not always align, then what? And so I think that in terms of kind of this transnational solidarity that I try to explore in my work, and where pockets of this are happening around different types of digital transformation and AI and these types of things, I think that the determination of these values should be shaped by the communities in the world. And so I can't tell you what those values are, but I think maybe we can figure out how can we come together to try and co-create them and explore that. And also thinking about at the level of global governance, and how sometimes people are like, oh, well, the state will act on behalf of the interests of the public. That is not always the case. And so what are the ways in which we can create new types of engagement and participation at the level of global policy as well? I think is really valuable, and different types of protections around that. And so I really appreciate your question. I'll pass it on.
I'll be quick as well. And I'll try and merge the question on governance and the question on the origins of the states, because I think it makes a lot of sense to even ask the very question that should we invest our time, our energy, our political capitals in reforming those institutions. Some people would say no, that for instance the IMF and the World Bank, they are what they are and they will be because that's why they were created for. And in a sense, for instance, the BRICS New Development Bank kind of provides an alternative to it. It's not a functional alternative. It will not solve the problem of development finance in the global south, but it provides another way of doing and institutionalizing change. In the case of the Amazon, it's also really important to, there is an international organization called the OTCA, Organization Treaty for Cooperation in the Amazon. But it's defunded. So countries in South America cannot really develop a specific understanding of what is their mission to end deforestation. So that's a big question when we go to COPs. We can't really act as a bloc, the Amazonian states, because there's, for instance, Bolivia depends too much more on deforestation than what Colombia does. And Brazil is trying to make an effort to try and lead those efforts, but there's not much institutionalized dialogue there. So that's maybe the reason why I point to the importance of building institutions. Since states were also built, institutions also have to be built. And I don't want to be, maybe I'll take a risk and try and answer the South Africa question. Not from the airline perspective, but definitely look at what Eskom is doing. So Eskom is the state electricity company from South Africa, and they are facing a huge challenge because South Africa is a country which not only depends a lot on fossil fuels, but also has a really massive problem of electricity shortage. So load shedding, it's the word that they use for it. And Eskom has been trying to develop other ways of doing policy, making sure that they can go green. But the problem is that it's so intrinsic to what they do that they might have to rethink the way that they were institutionalized as well. And other countries in Brazil, for instance, Petrobras, the big state oil companies, are also facing those challenges. So I think that that's a nice way to try and answer that specific point. And then on the last one, and how can states develop using, so the origin on how they were created, I think that a big word there, which it's the word hegemony. So like in the case of the US, that has a really big importance, and also in terms of what other countries can achieve. And in the case of Brazil, Brazil can't really, like, if we go into the end, we can't really just run our fiscal multiplier and just spend money to protect the Amazon. And that's because that H word's not there. And being trained as a PhD student, I'm always asking questions. So I don't know how to humanize mission-oriented policy, but I've come up with a question that makes sense, and I will at least take this as a learning lesson from this seminar, which is how can states in the global majority develop humanized policies to achieve their missions, because they have to set their own missions. And maybe the missions in case of Brazil is they are already set. How can we end deforestation? But for that, there has to be some kind of institutionalized understanding of what is the state for. So I like your question, and I think I'll develop a bit more this into the thesis.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. Just to add on everyone's about the unequal or unequal representation, I think, yeah, as a Palestinian, I had enough of that. And I think just to be very realistic about anything that we talk about, it's all boils down to who has the money and who controls where this money goes. And in water, let's talk about water, and not about Palestine, but more better places than Palestine. And the idea that those countries who are trying to invest to improve their water services and industry are completely dependent on others' money, and therefore they are just piling debt. And we've heard a lot about how this debt is pulling them down. So I think a key thing to do is to neutralize this dependency on money, and it comes down to justice, I guess, when we talk about a whole history of exploitation, which is still not a history, it's still happening, and keep putting that question, is that why any country in Africa who has this rich resources is not able to provide universal access to basic services. So I think it's just justice, and that's it. If you can achieve that, we'll all be happy. And and about the question of South Africa, I don't know much, but I know something about South Africa, which is related to the value question. Is that when you go visit Cape Town, I think it's one of the most beautiful cities that I ever visited, and I visited British Columbia in Canada, which is really beautiful. And then I was really impressed by that city and everything in that city. And then I had to go and do my field work in a slum, an informal settlement in Cape Town. And people die because they don't have toilets. People are killed just because they are protesting. So when you think about value, and the question is why people don't have this solidarity between them, why South Africans are not collaborating to fix apartheid's legacy, and the answer is they don't care enough. Who cares if this waitress who travels from that slum to come and work as a bartender has good toilet? She just comes and do the job and go back. So we have this isolation. We talk about solidarity today. We had another event about trends in India and about solidarity. And it was really refreshing to see how different castes in India at some point in urban villages have solidarity between them, and that's what helped them navigate the state's just terrible plans that strip people from their lands. So solidarity is sadly missing, and we can talk about this in so many places, including London. We have disadvantaged neighborhoods in London and others who are just rich as hell. So the question, I think, is what value means. If my value is not your value, then how can we come to a meeting point if we don't care about the same thing? And to do that is a very difficult thing to do in any place, because my priorities are different, and my privilege is different than yours. So eventually, anything I talk about is irrelevant to you. And the about states, I don't know if it's a question about the US or in general, but I think if we talk about in general, I think making a state is making that state doing its own thing, which I talked about in my 10 minutes intervention. And there was this book called Building State Capabilities, and it talks about isomorphic mimicry and how those development organizations are just enforcing a certain type of state, a certain type of institutions, and doing this is just a failure, because that country that you are paying for to do that will do it, not because they believe in it, but because this is the way to get the money, which is very natural thing to do. I want this certain good from you. I do what you do, not necessarily because I respect you or I care about you, but this is what I have. So I think it's the pressure of incentives that I have to do. Sorry, I made a very long answer, but
that's
thank
fantastic. Actually, Marian's remarks can be taken as the final remarks, because it was fantastic. Anyway, so we went from having lots of time for questions to have none. So what I'm gonna do is we upstairs we are serving wine, crisps, everything. Yeah, no crisps. Also wine, water. Okay, so I take back the crisps because I'm a bit hungry. So I will invite all of you to go upstairs and interact with this lovely panel. But before you go, I need to say two things. First of all, thank you very much for this. That was, obviously a very rich discussion. And I just would like to highlight to all of you that the entrepreneurial state, is where Mariana Mazzucato is challenging this minimalistic view of economic policy, right? And just to be very clear, because that's at the heart of IPP, most of the people nowadays, they think of the state, or the public opinion of the state is one that the state shouldn't spend. Most of you following the debate in the UK now is just that. And you have to go to the private sector for this entrepreneurship and innovation, right? And that kind of aspect is what Mariana is challenging. She's saying, look, this belief that just the private sector is innovative and competitive, and then the other side have the bureaucratic public sector does nothing, has to be challenged. For developing countries, this is even more important because that minimalistic view of the state is very easy to kind of get accepted in the developing countries because, developing countries, they have limited fiscal capacity, they don't have national savings, they have problems with inequality, as Mariana was saying, they have problems with external vulnerability, so it's so easy to buy into this narrative. But as you can see from this amazing panel, right, we can think the state in a different way, building upon the work Mazzucato has been doing in that institute, and I'm very lucky to be here, and I invite all of you to come back for other discussions. But thank you very much.